I'd been an artist, that was my hobby when I was a test pilot at Patuxent River in the Navy. Whenever I got back from the moon in Skylab, I began to think about whether I would stay with NASA and fly the shuttle. I was in training to do that, and I began to realize that there were young men and women in NASA that could fly the space shuttle better than I could. And I said, you know, wait a minute, I can go off and paint maybe some of the experiences that we had exploring the moon, one of the great adventures of humankind, and if I don't do it, no one's going to do it. It's an effort to show artistically the spirit of Apollo, what we tried to accomplish in Apollo. How you do that, I still haven't figured out, but I do work on it every single day, trying to show the things that we did in Apollo. Being on the moon is a lot different from being on Earth, and so there's a lot of magic to it, a lot of feelings that this is amazing, this is out of this world, this isn't real. From an artistic standpoint, that's about as good as I can do. I've not had the urge to do another painting titled "That's How It Felt to Walk on the Moon." I felt that was as good as I could do. One of the paintings I did was called "Tiptoeing on the Ocean of Storms," and it shows that I'm up on my tiptoes as I'm moving around. At 1/6 gravity in that suit, you have to move in a different way. Well, of course, the first step I made on the moon, I remember that and like it. I didn't have anything special to say. I hadn't thought of anything. What I was trying to do was get my balance, which takes 2 or 3 minutes, so that I could go around and take a small pin, an astronaut pin that I had earned, silver pin, that I'd worn in my lapel for a number of years before going to the moon, and I pulled it out. I walked over to the edge of the lunar module, looked back at Surveyor in a crater about 600 feet away, and then I threw that pin out towards Surveyor. I did a painting of it called Lone Star because that's the only star we saw on the moon. But I can see that pin going over there, and I think how it'll be there for millions and millions of years, or until some tourist goes up there and picks it up, brings it back to Earth, which will happen someday, someday. I began painting showing only what we did, digging ditches, running along the moon, making observations. And then as time passed, I began to realize that the human spirit is the most important element in all exploration. It's fun to think about playing football on the moon. I did a painting of that. These are things that appeal to our souls, or what's inside of all of us. And we need to connect to those things for future growth. These are just as important as the weight of a rock. It's just another way to celebrate one of the great accomplishments of humankind. So I left the space program to do that job.
The early space program was an adventure that I just couldn't believe that I was involved with. It was a continuation of the kind of relationships that I had had in the military and in flight tests. Absolute trust, a high-risk environment, absolutely spectacular leaders. There are certain events in life that you never forget. And the lunar landing, and in particular the last seconds leading up to the landing, will never be forgotten. We had battled to get to the surface. We had problems with communications, we had minor electrical. Navigation, we were concerned about that. And as the crew took over at about 2 minutes prior to landing, searching for a landing site, we knew that they were going to be using a lot more fuel than we had expected. And I had a single controller in the room. The room became totally silent just about 2 minutes prior to landing. And this controller was just calling out the seconds of fuel remaining.
5.5 pounds. 60 seconds. Lights on.
And it was just 60 seconds, 30 seconds. And then we heard the crew say, we're kicking up some dust.
40 feet down, 2.5. Picking up some dust. 4 forward.
And just as Bob Carlton, who was my controller in the lunar module, responsible for the propulsion systems, called out fifth, and then we heard the crew going through the shutdown.
Contact light. Okay, engine stop.
We copy you down, Eagle.
And then we had Houston, Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed.
Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed.
in this room that had been battling to get to the surface was absolutely silent. The unfortunate thing is no controller had an opportunity to absorb the emotion of that landing because we had to work for the next 2 hours, nonstop. Then we could celebrate. We had landed on the moon. Apollo 13 was a team effort from the very beginning to the end.
We've had a hardware restart. I don't know what it was. Okay. Houston, we've had a problem.
And it was that process of going through the cryostir. There was a fault in the tank, a design fault and a procedural fault that existed well prior to the time that we took off.
We may have had an instrumentation problem, flight. Roger.
And we now had a fire inside the tank that blew the dome of the tank off. When the dome came off, the insulation caught fire, and fed by the oxygen, it was like a blowtorch racing through the bay of the spacecraft, tearing out the instrumentation and the plumbing and the electrical systems, till finally it blew the side of the spacecraft off. At which time Jim Lovell called down to the ground, "Hey, Houston, we've got a problem." That series of events started the saga of Apollo 13. Throughout the entire Apollo 13 mission, the teams in mission control changed shifts almost regularly at 8-hour intervals. And the teams kept the mission going, kept working the problem as my teams tried to come up with the answers. And this team had it. I'm very proud of this team. I got a lot of recognition for the work that we did, but the real heroes of Apollo 13 were the people in the back rooms and over in the engineering facilities who came up with the answers we needed. The exact words I used in mission control is, "We have never lost an American in space, and we sure as hell aren't going to lose one now. This crew is coming home. You got to believe it. Your team must believe it, and we must make it happen." And this was a bit too long for the people during doing the movie scripting. So they took the first part, then they added, "On never lost a crew in space on my shift." All shifts were my shift by definition. So it didn't matter whose shift it was. This was a crew that we had that was in trouble, and we had to get them home.